For Sunrise Bakery, let us do the cooking. Another Tasmania Talks podcast.
Just quickly, I want to touch base with Lynn Cleaver here because there's been some developments overnight in a story that we've been sort of following for some months now, and that's the medicinal cannabis issue. Now, federal laws were changed that will allow people to apply for a license to legally grow medicinal cannabis. Now, it's medicinal use only. It came into effect yesterday. I'm just wondering what the state response is. Does the state need to pass legislation paralleling it? What's the story? I'm just curious to get, first up, the reaction of Lynn Cleaver, who's a medicinal cannabis campaigner in Tasmania, as you know, and has been a regular on the show for a long time. G'day, Lynn. How are you going?
Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Good. How does this affect you?
It doesn't really. It's a really important step for Australia. This means that we will be able to have a domestic cultivation and manufacturing scheme within the country. But as for what's happening in Tasmania now, and indeed the rest of Australia, it doesn't help us at the moment at all. Our patients, we can't apply for a licence.
But under this scheme, my understanding is that it's a federal law, so you would be able to. Why am I wrong?
You have to. We would have to prove that that we would be cultivating cannabis in order to on-sell to be manufactured into medicine. So it's not suitable for just somebody who wants to grow 6 plants.
Oh, okay. So the devil is in the detail. Okay, so let me just get this straight. So if you want to be a producer, and this is really more for a commercial operation by the sounds of it, so yeah. you develop a commercial marijuana crop, which you then sell to a pharmaceutical company to ultimately turn into drug. Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Or you can do that whole process yourself. You can cultivate and manufacture something that's suitable that can be approved by the TGA. So
right.
It's not a process where just an average person will be able to be licensed, which would be really nice. We'd be happy to pay for a license to grow cannabis for Jeremy so we, weren't at risk. Okay,
right. No, it's not being presented quite the way. Hang on, sorry. The reality's not quite the way it's being presented.
No, cannabis isn't legal.
The story does make that point quite succinctly, that it doesn't change in any way the recreational prohibition of marijuana use. But okay. That's all right. So it's some good news for those who want to get involved in a commercial marijuana crop.
Absolutely, okay. And we need that in Australia, and that eventually will mean that somewhere down the line there will be locally grown cannabis cultivated and manufactured for patients here in Australia. But that's going to be a little while away, and the overheads for setting up these sorts of businesses are going to be enormous. So it's going to sort of block out the small business. It's going to be big corporations that will be doing this.
And it seems like the government legislation is attempting to open up the industry as much as it possibly can to the pharmaceutical companies who are doing their level best to stop it.
Yeah. It does.
I mean, that's sort of the tactic, isn't it? I mean, that's a well-established tactic now, isn't it?
It's because it's so tightly regulated, Brian, and there's so much fear surrounding, the plant. And even with these federal changes, we still have to wait for states and territories to tell us who can use cannabis, what sort of cannabis they'll be able to use. And, so it's very much, the ball's in the Hodgman government court at the moment as to who will have access here in Tasmania and what they'll have access to.
Not rushing, are they?
They don't appear to be, and that's the really disappointing thing, Brian, because I don't think the government appreciates the scope of medicinal cannabis use within Tasmania. There's some really ill people that are relying on compassionate suppliers to keep them alive.
Yeah.
It's not, we're not playing games out here. This is serious.
And you know what their reaction to that would be is they're more concerned about the number of people should the rules and regulations around marijuana being somewhat relaxed, that recreational market going absolutely through the roof. And I've got to say there's some evidence to support that based on what's happened in the United States. So they have some reasonable cause for concern, but in this particular area, I agree they're lagging. Lynn, appreciate your time today. Thanks for clearing that up. Good on you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn's plugged into that. She knows what's going on. So there it is. Not as presented. This does not allow individual people who are maybe using marijuana for their children with epilepsy or whatever, it's not going to help you guys. What it will do is allow commercial farmers to apply for a license to then sell the product into what pharmaceutical companies to make into a tablet or a capsule.
For Sunrise Bakery, let us do the cooking. Another Tasmania Talks podcast.